why would somebody writing a longer text start with creation at all? Why do we have a creation story to begin with? Um, One of the things to think about here is what's the purpose of the Pentateuch or the Torah as a whole? Um, Based simply on the amount of material devoted, the promulgation of the laws, the ritual laws of Leviticus or the sort of more civil laws of Exodus and Deuteronomy, right? The laws seem to have been the central feature of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, and giving us the framework for the laws would seem to be the main purpose, at least literarily, behind the historical writings that come before them. So everything in Genesis on. Um, right, these stories that we read, like Genesis 1, weren't written to be independently uh, sort of uh, analyzed for sort of their theological, for their theological claims. Right? They were part of a bigger whole of which the laws were the central part. Uh, there's the famous medieval Jewish interpreter who we call Rashi, who famously asked in his commentary on Genesis 1:1, the first thing he says is, why don't we start in Exodus 12, which is where the first laws are in Jewish tradition? Why don't we start in Exodus 12? Why do we have this whole book and a half beforehand? Why do we start here? Uh, and the answer that he gives is because we need to understand why we have the law. How did we get here? How did it become the case that Israel has these laws specifically? And the historical background gives us the answer to that question. You can see how this works in Genesis 1 in particular, because all these separations and categorizations that I talked about earlier, what we find in Genesis 1 becomes the basis for separation and categorization later when Israel actually receives specific laws. So we get the creation of the lights to serve as signs for set times and days and years, and those set times aren't effective in any way until Leviticus. Right? When Israel gets to Sinai, God says, okay, so I established the system for identifying set times back at creation, and I didn't do anything with it until now. And now I'm going to give you laws that take those into account. Similarly, of course, the animals being created in their various kinds becomes the basis for the kosher laws that will come up also in Leviticus. And most obviously, the Sabbath on the seventh day when God rests, right? And God sanctifies that day and doesn't tell anybody what to do with that sanctification. What's anybody supposed to do on the Sabbath now that God has sanctified it on the seventh day? Nobody knows until God gives laws to Israel at Sinai and says, here's what you're going to do on the Sabbath day. You're going to rest in order to sanctify it. What do I want to say about the Sabbath while I'm here? I want to point out that there's something unique about the Sabbath in that it is the only sort of one of the festivals or times that is kind of given all the way at the beginning, right? Uh, God will give a calendar for all of the festivals in Leviticus and say, okay, so in whatever month, on whatever day, you celebrate this festival. But Sabbath has to happen in Genesis 1 at creation because Sabbath isn't tied to the moon. It's not tied to right, what anchors the seventh day. The only anchor for the seventh day is creation. Right? Our weeks just have to go back infinitely. So Sabbath has to be created in the process of creation. The seventh day has to be like noticed because we have been counting ever since, or at least God has been counting ever since. So Sabbath has a sort of distinctive standing that goes all the way back to creation.